His initial appearance on a global stage, if you will, is in Afghanistan, and his role in finding support and ultimately raising a small number of troops to fight on behalf of the Afghan Mujahideen against the Soviet invaders in Afghanistan. That was a critical and formative experience for him. How would you summarize it?
Well, it's so interesting because in all of the discussion about Osama bin Laden, people feel that Afghanistan really shaped him, that it was after Afghanistan that he was a changed person. My own sense is that he was trying to find his way in Afghanistan, and for a long time he didn't know what to do, that he was actually very much a part of two major groups, the American forces from outside, but the ISI, which is the Services Intelligence Group of the Pakistanis. And remember, this is not Arabia, this is Afghanistan, and it's governed by forces that are only accidentally or in a very rough way connected to the rest of the Muslim world. So he was certainly a party to groups whom the CIA funded, but much more beholden to those that the ISI or Inter-Service Intelligence of the Pakistani government controlled. And so he was trying to figure out how his Arab group could represent not only a difference, but an Arab difference in Afghanistan. So to the extent that Afghanistan shaped him, it shaped him by finding how a minority group, Arabs, Arab Muslims, Arab Muslim Mujahideen, could control a movement that was not in their own territory, not with their own group, not even with their own funds, but yet represented a distinctive claim to influence the outcome.
How successful was he in developing an influence and an impact on behalf of himself and the Arab Afghans in that war?
It's a great debate, and I don't think it's going to be settled on this program. I hope it'll be settled in my lifetime. But by and large, the two different views are that the notion that he was himself a major player, or even that he had fought, that there's even a question mark, did he actually fight? Was he ever wounded in any of the many, many battles? And of course, the huge loss of life and property and violence that characterized the Afghan War, which one has to always remember was between the Soviets and the Afghans, with the Pakistanis playing some role and the Americans playing some role, but the two major combatants being the Soviets and the Afghans. In that whole fight, I think he saw himself as someone who was aligned primarily with the most devout of the Afghan opponents of the Soviets, and it's a group that had not yet been defined as the Taliban, but a group that later became the Taliban. So he was already with tribesmen who were, first of all, Pashtun, and I'm sorry to use technical names, but racial or ethnic differences within Afghanistan are extraordinarily important. And see, he aligned with a group that was Pashtun, that was the majority group in Afghanistan, and said, in effect, we Arabs, or we, the Arab contingent of Mujahideen, will support you in evicting the Soviets and in trying to make a balance between the Pakistani and American outsiders who want to take credit for this large-scale war and eventually for the victory.
Now, he goes back to Saudi Arabia at the end of the Afghan War.
Right.
A hero. And he's one of the young Arab men who's given credit for helping mobilize the resistance, the ultimately successful resistance against the Soviets. And yet at that point, he's a bit at loose ends.
He's an unemployed hero.
He's an unemployed hero. And the war begins with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. And he has this idea that he's going to lead an Arab legion to defend Kuwait or reclaim Kuwait and defeat the Iraqis, rather than invite the Americans and the other allies on behalf of the Saudi government to take on this fight. This is an important breaking point for bin Laden with the Saudi government.
What's really curious about it, your analysis is completely correct, and what's really curious about it is the underside of the story. And the underside of the story is that he had expectations. No one has confirmed that they have a basis in fact, but he had expectations that he would at least be included in an Arab-only force that would, as you say, reclaim Kuwait, or at least begin the attack against the Iraqi occupying forces in Kuwait and evict them. And what really evolved was that the Saudi government, I think it was a wise decision, my own opinion, a wise decision on their part, that they, first of all, might not have won with simply their own forces in a contingent against a very well-armed and very skillful Iraqi invading force. But secondly, I think the greater thing that was at stake for the Saudi government was a recognition that his own influences and motives were not simply to have a Saudi victory, but to take credit for it and therefore for himself to emerge as, quote unquote, the new Arab leader with implications for the future stability and even perhaps the future direction of the Saudi state. In other words, they could not, the Saudis could not, and Prince Turki Faisal, I think, is the most wise, if I can say that, wise and insightful and certainly recorded spokesperson on this, said, we always thought of this guy as somebody who could go out there and do things in a certain way with a flair, but we never thought of him as a leader. And I think one of the things that underlies that statement is the feeling that he could not be trusted, that he might volunteer, he might have been a very good fighter, they might have made some great headline in the efforts that they undertook against the Iraqi invaders of Kuwait. But first of all, their success wasn't guaranteed. But even more, there was no guarantee that their success would be credited to the Saudi state,